The Strawhat vs Blackbeard pirate matchups will be some of the deepest and most climactic battles in the entire story. And the biggest thing that I've focused on in every video that I've done on these matchups so far is how all of these fights are going to be so much more than just bouts between those with similar roles on the crew or similar aesthetics or powers. These battles are instead going to be about characters opposing dreams, ideals, and maybe even backstories, because that builds right onto the theme that Oda's already established with Luffy and Blackbeard, which is that they are all two sides of the same coin. But the Straw Hats will of course be on the right side of that coin. That idea will exist for every matchup between these crews, and while some of them might be kind of obvious, like how Chopper's goal is to heal people and Doc Cube makes people sick, some of them are less obvious, such as today's matchup, where we are breaking down why the navigator of our crew, Nami, will defeat the heavy drinker, the man who was known for brutality even among the level 6 prisoners, Vasco Shot. Now, if you've been following my series on these for a while, you might remember I once had Vasco Shot instead fighting Brook, but I later changed that matchup to Brook vs Lafitte. And at this point in the series, Nami's actually the only Straw Hat that I have left to cover other than Luffy, who I am saving for last. But the thing is, there are still 2 Blackbeard pirates remaining since their crew outnumbers the Straw Hats by 1, and that's Vasco Shot and Katarina Devon. That means that Nami will fight one of them, and barring a Blackbeard pirate dying or leaving the crew, we would need another new mysterious Straw Hat to fight the other. And I totally get that Nami fighting Katarina probably makes a lot of sense on the surface, since Katarina was known to hunt the faces of pretty women. It's probably the most common matchup that I've seen for Nami, but I think one of the potential Straw Hats fits for that reason and many others, which will be the focus of my next matchup video, so subscribe for that. But even with the limited amount of information we know about Vasco Shot, I think there's a lot of reasons why Nami specifically should be the one to fight him. Starting with Vasco's personality, because while Vasco doesn't go as far to collect the faces of pretty women exactly, from what we know of at least, his comments during Amazon Lily aren't that much better. This dude is an absolute creep, and I think that sets him up pretty well to be defeated by a woman later on, so that he basically gets put in his place, which is something that Oda's had Nami do several times before. You think back to Absalom with the whole marriage thing, or even Roto here at the start of Elbaf, and I think what makes Nami the perfect person to defeat Vasco Shot in particular is that she is kind of already a natural counter for his abilities, the Gabu Gabu no Mi, or the Glug Glug fruit. This allows him to use what seem to be alcohol-based powers, which tie right into his epithet, Heavy Drinker, as well as his actual name, Vasco Shot. But Nami, on the other hand, has an extremely high alcohol tolerance. You might remember her out drinking 15 people in Whiskey Peak before pretending to pass out. In fact, she actually has the 3rd highest alcohol tolerance among the Straw Hats, only behind Jinbei and Zoro. And Oda even mentioned how it was hard for him to rank all of them because some crew members, like Zoro for example, enjoy drinking a lot more than others. So I think you could really argue that Nami actually has the pound for pound best alcohol tolerance, since Zoro drinks probably every single day, and Jinbei is only on the list for the drink like a fish jokes and the fact that he's massive compared to the rest of the crew. But seeing Jinbei at the top of the list kinda does make me wonder if Vasco himself could be a fishman. And it's not just because of the drink like a fish jokes, but also because Nami obviously has a very tumultuous past with the fishmen. Now, officially speaking, it seems to be that Vasco is a human. We don't have any confirmation that he's a fishman, but even just looking at him, you'd think he's like a blobfish fishman or something. And he's also freaking massive, by the way, being the 2nd biggest Blackbeard member behind San Juan Wolf, which tells me he's probably something other than just a human. And he also has the longest nose of any character in the entire series, and it could be that his nose is supposed to be a hint to rhinophyma, or drinker's nose, which is a condition usually wrongly associated with alcoholism. But it really wouldn't surprise me if it just ends up being because of his fishman lineage or whatever. And even if you kind of think about it in terms of how Blackbeard's crew mirrors Luffy's, he should probably get a fishman at some point. I mean, most crews do. It's not going to do him a lot of good since all of his crew members have devil fruits, but regardless. And Teach already seems to have an Oni or something in Pizarro and a giant in San Juan Wolf, so why not sprinkle a fishman in there as well? Because it would obviously also make the battle with Nami just that much more compelling. But what could really put this fight over the top all depends on why Vasco Shot was said to be more brutal than even the other level 6 prisoners. What could possibly get you that kind of recognition? And furthermore, what got him put in level 6 in the first place? You have to commit a pretty heinous crime, at least from the government's perspective, to be put down there, since they are trying to erase you from history. And also, remember how Blackbeard had the prisoners fight each other for the right to join his crew? The fact that Vasco Shot made it out of that is further proof that he means business. And as I've mentioned in the other videos in this series, I think all of these prisoners will have affected the Straw Hats' lives or their journey in some way that we have yet to learn. But obviously when these fights happen, that would be the place for that to get uncovered. And if Vasco is really gonna fight Nami, then I think the most obvious answer here is that Vasco Shot caused the destruction of Oikot Kingdom, which is where Nami was born. Now, we unfortunately don't know all that much about the Oikot situation yet. In fact, most of the information we do have is just from Nami's short flashback, so truthfully, this theory is a tough egg to crack. All we've gotten since then is just the name Oikot Kingdom in a Viver card, which is Tokyo backwards, and we also got the islands designed during the live action, which who knows if that's really canon or not, but I will say the design was pretty badass. But regardless, there just isn't a ton to go off of here other than the flashback we got all the way back in chapter 77. But even with some of those small context clues from that chapter, I think someone like Vasco Shot is a really good candidate to have caused it, because by virtue of the Marines defending the island back then, we know that they were government affiliated and thus also paid the Celestial tribute, and that would also mean that they were probably fighting against pirates, which Vasco is obviously one of those. And on top of that, it appears that that war was pretty deadly. We saw Marine bodies everywhere, and Belle Mare was even said to be ready to just close her eyes and die until Nami and Nojiko came along. So if we assume that a lot of Marines did die that day, which seems to be the case, that could be the reason Vasco Shot was said to be so brutal, and even why he was thrown in level 6, because the government is likely the one controlling that narrative, as they have done throughout the story. They're the ones who ultimately tell the world who's good and bad, and you're probably more likely to get thrown in level 6 for threatening the government or threatening the Marines than just average people anyway. So whoever killed all those Marines, and maybe even the royalty of that island, because again, they would have been government affiliated people, would probably warrant some extra concern from the world government. And this has also led to a lot of theories over the years about Nami being of royalty from that country, almost like a lost princess of sorts. And this could set up a situation where maybe Vasco Shot did kill her biological parents, sort of mirroring how Arlong killed Belle Mare, and this fight could be where she can get revenge on him herself, because previously she had to rely on Luffy to get revenge for Belle Mare by defeating Arlong. And in some ways, I think her defeating Vasco gets extra revenge for Belle Mare, because if Oikot never happened, Belle Mare would have never needed to adopt Nami and Nojiko, and if she didn't have kids whenever Arlong arrived, she wouldn't have needed to pay that extra tribute that she didn't have, and thus she would still be alive today. So in some ways, Vasco may not have only led to the death of Nami's biological parents, but maybe even her adopted mom as well. And I think there's honestly a lot of juice behind the idea of Nami being from royalty originally, because Nami has obviously always loved money, right? And even in her flashback, she told Belle Mare that she wished that she had been found by a rich family. And maybe that's because she was originally born into one. That could be exactly what Oda's hinting at here. We also saw that Vasco Shot wanted to go invade a nearby town just to get some booze during the time skip, and he was also threatening to just burn down the city in Hachinosu during Garp's attack, even though he wasn't supposed to. So this guy really doesn't give a damn. He's honestly kind of a savage. But given Nami's natural alcohol tolerance and Vasco Shot's love for booze, part of me has also started wondering if Oikot was maybe just the home of some really good sake. I mean, if the name that Oda chose for this place is the capital of Japan backwards, then having it tied to sake in some way might not be the craziest thing, especially because it would give Vasco in particular a very good reason to go there. And yeah, going after some booze might seem like a weak reason to burn a city to the ground, but that's the exact kind of thing that would get you that brutal label that Vasco has. And I also looked into the life of Vasco Shot's real life inspiration, Vasco da Gama, to see if there was any connection to this theory, and I did end up finding something that at least ties him to the East Blue, which is where Oikot is found, because Vasco da Gama was quite an accomplished European explorer, originally being born in mid-1400s Portugal and then dying in 1524 due to malaria. He's typically credited with being the first European to reach India by sea, which then helped open up the lucrative spice trade with his home country of Portugal. And there are quite a few stories to tell about this guy. I'm probably going to save some of them for a future video that I'm working on about real-life inspirations for One Piece, but trust me, he was just as insane as he was successful. And one thing about him that might tie to this brutality angle with Vasco Shot is what happened when Vasco da Gama came across the ship known as the Miri. This ship was carrying 400 pilgrims, many of them women and children, and instead of taking their bribes like they asked, da Gama just lit the entire thing on fire. The dude was kinda twisted, and honestly, I think this is something that Vasco Shot would probably do today, especially since he has fire powers. And there was also a time when his crew felt an underwater earthquake, and the sea was said to be boiling and the ship was trembling, and while one guy on his crew ended up drowning during it, Vasco da Gama instead said, "Friends, rejoice and be happy, for even the sea trembles before us," which literally sounds like something a One Piece pirate would say, if you ask me. But due to all of his efforts and expeditions over the years, Vasco da Gama later had a famous port city named after him in India in the state of Goa, which might sound a little familiar since Luffy was born in Goa Kingdom in the East Blue. So that ties Vasco to the East Blue at the very least, even if not Oikot directly. But now I want to switch gears and discuss how this fight between Nami and Vasco Shot could actually go down. Like, how does Nami step it up so she's able to defeat someone as strong as Vasco in a 1v1? Well, I think that all depends on exactly how Vasco Shot's awakening works, because based off of the other Paramecia awakenings that we've seen, we can likely assume that it will at least allow him to turn the environment around him into sake temporarily, just like Doflamingo and his string awakening in Dressrosa, for example. And I think there's a lot of fun outcomes there, which we'll get to a bit later in the video, but there is also the chance that it will let Vasco Shot affect Nami directly. And given Nami's alcohol tolerance that we've talked about, I think this is an important place to start. Because while typically we just see Paramecia awakenings affect surroundings, there have been cases where it lets Devil Fruit users affect people directly. Think about Eustace Kid turning Big Mom herself into a magnet during Wano. And there are some Paramecia that are able to do this without the awakening component as well, obviously. Like how Doc Q was able to turn Law into a woman, and he even did so from a distance. So without us knowing all that much about how Vasco's fruit works just yet, I think it's definitely possible that he could use his powers to just make people really drunk, basically. And honestly, whenever you introduce an alcohol-based power into a story, making other people really drunk with that power should be kind of like the base level expectation, I think, because then you could basically inebriate people so they have a harder time fighting back, or maybe just even pass out altogether. It could even become a situation where he's even getting drunk at the very same time as you, because maybe the awakening affects everyone in the area. So then you almost need to have like more tolerance than he does in order to win, which again would build off this Nami's alcohol tolerance thing. And for her to beat the heavy drinker Vasco Shot, the guy with the sake fruit, that would be kind of hype in its own way. But as we saw with Law in that Doc Q situation, and as with Big Mom and Kaido in Wano to begin with, Haki is able to cancel Devil Fruit abilities. Law was able to exude enough Haki to cancel the transformation, Big Mom and Kaido use enough Haki to stop Law from ever teleporting them, etc. So if it ever does become the case where Nami has to find a way to kind of counter Vasco's ability because her tolerance isn't quite high enough, I think a Haki Bloom could actually be the perfect way to do so. And I really think that this is something that Nami, and a lot of the crew for that matter, really need. Because we're a Yonko crew at this point, and while I love the climactic upgrade, and I really love Zeus, and I also love, you know, Chopper's Monster Point extension and everything, Haki needs to enter the equation eventually. And if not now, then it should at least happen by the time we fight the Blackbeard pirates, because by virtue of Oda introducing this whole Haki cancels Devil Fruits thing, that should probably be a factor versus the crew filled with Devil Fruit users, right? And while I'm sure a lot of the Blackbeard pirates have Haki as well, they probably also rely on their fruits a lot, I would imagine. And I would also think that they aren't really expecting a lot of people to have enough Haki to counter them in the first place, so it might even become a necessity for the crew to figure this out later down the line. And I think that would also be true if Vasco Shot's awakening worked the other way, like your average paramecia, where he can just turn everything around him into sake, and then he would probably just light it all on fire. Because when this first crossed my mind, I sort of figured that Nami could just make it rain, sort of like she did with Luffy vs. Cracker, and thus put out the fire, and this would all kind of be a moot point. But I also sort of doubt that Oda would ever make it that easy. He'd probably do something like let Vasco turn the rain into sake as well, so then at that point it would just be raining fire. Or Oda would at least do something where Nami has to actually step it up and do something new instead of relying on her old bag of tricks. So then I sort of backed up a little bit and just thought about what exactly Oda would be going for here. Because if this is Nami's final fight, or one of them at least, then it really should act as kind of an exclamation point on a lot of the development that she's had throughout the series. I mean, all of these Blackbeard fights are going to be kind of the same way. They'll act as a culmination of the character arc and power-ups that Oda's been building for the Straw Hats this entire time. So how could Vasco's fire possibly tie to Nami in that way? Well, that's where it kind of hit me. Nami already has a lightning homie, but not a fire homie, which we have of course seen with Big Mom and Prometheus, and even Mother Carmel with Pandora, who I kinda hope we end up seeing in Elbaf if he's still alive, but that's beside the point, because if the past two Soul Fruit users had a fire homie specifically, then maybe Nami should add one as well, even if she doesn't have the fruit herself. And now I want to be clear that I don't think Nami would necessarily get a brand new homie, like an entirely new being, but rather she might upgrade Zeus even further with that fire from Vasco Shot. I mean, Zeus already went from just being a cloud to being imbued directly into the climactic, which gives him some new abilities, and with him being Nami's main weapon of choice at this point, he's probably due for at least one more upgrade, I would argue. And if you think it sounds a little weird to combine a lightning homie with a fire one, well, we already saw that happen in Wano because of Misery, who was a combination of Hera and Prometheus. Zeus getting this power-up could almost be a way for him to prove that he's better than those two bozos, which is kind of cool in its own right. And we'll get to exactly how that all might just happen in a second, but I first want to touch on why this makes so much sense for Nami, not just from a power-up angle, but also because it encapsulates a massive part of her character, and a part that Oda's been using Zeus to illustrate specifically, which is that she's a good motherly figure, and a much better one than Big Mom and Mother Carmel specifically. We saw this very clearly with how Nami treated the kids at Punk Hazard, as well as Tama and Wano, multiple times honestly, and I think that's a really big reason why Oda gave Nami one of Big Mom's main homies. We now get to contrast exactly how Nami and Big Mom treat the same being, which kind of reflects how they treat children as well. And obviously, Nami has been far, far kinder to Zeus than Big Mom ever was. Now, the slave jokes aside, Nami fed him the black clouds he likes, she didn't rip his soul out just for disobeying, and when he rejoined her after combining with the climactic, he asked her if he could be her slave again, but Nami responded by saying, "Let's be partners instead." Nami treats Zeus like an actual person with thoughts and feelings, and Big Mom treats him just like an object, sorta like how she treats her own children. And I think part of that is because Nami had a good adoptive mother in Belmare, but Big Mom had a bad one in Mother Carmel. They contrast each other in a lot of ways, so I think Oda is building Nami up to essentially become a better Big Mom, and because of that, I think she's gonna get a lot more out of the homies than Big Mom ever could. Nami's kind and nurturing way will go on to surpass Big Mom's evil and controlling way, and I'll be honest, there is a decent chance that this fire power-up could just happen here in Elbaf, because this island is obviously where the past Soul Fruit users resided, so I'm sure we'll get some lore about that at some point, but the island is also on fire literally right now, and we've heard that fire and lightning are Elbaf's greatest threats, which are obviously exemplified by Big Mom's main two homies, or even Zeus if he gets this fire upgrade. I mean, remember how Mother Carmel put out that huge fire in Elbaf by creating Pandora? I could almost see Nami and Zeus having a very similar moment, either here in Elbaf, or maybe later against Vasco Shot in this final fight. But how exactly would that even work? I mean, barring the absolutely crazy situation where Nami actually gets the soul Devil Fruit, which I highly doubt will happen, how could she ever even put fire into Zeus in the first place? Well, I think we got a hint to that back in chapter 1145 when Goldberg told us that his shield became a homie named Nash after his dad clashed with Big Mom. Because if they were clashing with one another, I highly doubt that Big Mom would have made it into a homie on purpose, since it would probably help Goldberg's dad. I mean, maybe her goal was to turn it into a homie so it would join her side instead, but since the shield obviously stuck around with the Giants afterward, I'm not so sure that's the case. Until we learn more, I feel like this situation was a lot more of an accident, just like the last time we saw something like this happen, where Zeus accidentally got merged into the climactic. Obviously, Big Mom did not mean to do that, and so I think Nash may have been created in very much the same way, except instead of Big Mom willingly removing some of her homie's soul like that, I think that Goldberg's dad might have just used so much hockey that he's the one who caused some of the soul to leave one of her homies and thus merge into a shield, and here we are. We also saw during Whole Cake Island that Brook could free some of the lower level homies just by using his music, and music is said to tie to emotions, and during the time skip it gave people the will to fight specifically, and obviously hockey is tied to will. So even if we haven't seen hockey specifically remove the soul from a homie just yet, I think that could definitely happen. And to a greater degree, I think we're gonna start seeing hockey cancel Devil Fruit abilities on other objects very soon. Because earlier we talked about how hockey lets people cancel Devil Fruit powers affecting their own body, but other objects is kind of a new thing. I mean, imagine people using hockey to fix the zombies in Thriller Bark, or to de-petrify people who were turned to stone, or a lot of other examples. I think it would probably be an extension of this internal destruction hockey that we learned about during Wano, because coding yourself with hockey was said to be a lot easier than actually sending your hockey into another thing to destroy it. So maybe eventually we'll see that people can like send their hockey all the way through, or at least deep enough, or something that will cancel Devil Fruit effects on another being. And to make that point even stronger, you know, when Luffy was learning that advanced hockey during the Udon prison segment of Wano, the first time he ever actually put it to use in real combat was against Big Mom. Maybe once he masters that all the way, we'll see him actually take out a homie directly. Hell, I think the hockey rope that we saw in Egghead could even be an example of this as well, because obviously Joy Boy was able to put his hockey into the rope for a very long time, and Emeth could release it later, but the effects of it literally sent the Gorosei all the way back to Marijois. It canceled their circle and their transformations. And now we don't know if they actually have devil fruits yet, I personally highly doubt it, but regardless, it's the same kind of thing, right? Their special powers stopped all because of hockey. Maybe Kaido is right that hockey does rule all, we just haven't seen enough of hockey to fully understand why. And I think the reason that Oda hasn't really introduced this whole canceling devil fruit powers on objects thing just yet is because the implications of it are just kind of insane. Like, if the poneglyphs or the red line were really living things at some point in the past but were turned to stone, Luffy might eventually be able to use hockey to cancel those. Boa said that she couldn't do it if a past user is who petrified them, but maybe Luffy can fix it. Or hell, maybe the whale tree really was a whale at some point and Luffy can turn it back. But taking this all back to Nami versus Vasco Shot, I think what might happen is, you know, Vasco will light everything on fire around her, she'll have nowhere else to go, she'll look at Zeus and remember how he combined with the climactic, she'll use hockey to pull some of his soul out, capture all the fire, send it back to Vasco Shot, W's across the board. Like I said a little bit ago, it could be a lot like the Mother Carmel scene where she made Pandora. So Oda would sort of be marrying all these huge homie moments from the past into one climactic ending that proves why Nami's better than either of the past soul fruit users, despite her not even having that power herself. It would be a great way to not only give Nami specifically a very cool and necessary hockey power-up, but also round out this Zeus plotline at the very same time. He would grow to become probably the strongest homie the world has ever seen, which I think is very fitting since he would have never achieved it without Nami's help. And Vasco would get literally cooked in this scenario, which he deserves. But alright guys, that's it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, I would really appreciate you guys hitting the like button before you head out. And if you want to see those final 2 Blackbeard matchup videos whenever I get around to them, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified for those. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you guys for watching. These are some of my favorite videos to do, and I'm kind of sad there's only 2 left, but I will leave my entire Blackbeard vs Strawhat playlist up here in case you want to see some of the old ones. But until next time, later.